Welcome back to the podcast. We are diving into the war strategy, emotional damage, found family, and dramatic reunions that make up A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. We're heading back to the Night Court to talk about all the chaos, all the power plays, and the tension that's had us stressed out all month. Join us as we discuss the moments that had us screaming, crying, and immediately needing to text someone about it. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and get ready because we have a lot to unpack. In this set of chapters, discussions about going to the Night Court and getting Kerr, Moore's father, and his Darkbringer Legion to join them with the war that's most likely coming. Multiple training sessions with Cassian and as well as Azriel, because we do get an additional training session that Feyre's going to take on, which I'm so excited for. We get to see Nesda a little bit more as well, as far as she starts training herself. We don't quite know what powers she has, but she's going to start training with Amram because they think she's going to be able to patch up the wall. Cassian and Feyre go back to the Bone Carver. We get some explicit content between Rhys and Feyre that we will lightly touch on, and that's it. And we get to check out an ancient library, which I'm so excited to go down into the library. So we start out with discussions about the war that is coming, specifically discussions with Moore's father, Kerr, who is the steward of the Hewn City, or the Court of Nightmares. They're going to ask him if he will join them for the war because they do need all of the allies that they can get. Let me back up for a second. We ended the last section of chapters at a dinner with the Inner Circle, as well as Lucian and Nesda has chosen to join them. So it's at that dinner that they're having this discussion. They talked about Rhys sending out invitations to all of the High Lords in Prythian, inviting them to a meeting in 2 weeks for them to discuss this war and talk about allies and how Prythian is going to respond to Hybern. And so now we're rolling into this set of chapters talking about continuation of that discussion, talking about Kerr and his Darkbringer Legion, that it was considerable enough that they needed to ask him if he would join them and fight in the war on their side. That Nesda brings up, why don't you just order them to join? And Rhys outlines for us that as steward of the Hewn City, Kerr and his Darkbringer Legion have the option to say no if Rhys asks them to fight with him. But it was all part of the agreement that his ancestors had made between the Court of Nightmares and the Court of Dreams, that they would remain inside the mountain and they would not challenge or disturb anybody outside of their borders, but that they would retain the right to decide not to assist in a war. Feyre asks, because she's wanting to know. She wants to know everything. She's always full of questions. She asks if they have ever refused. And Moore tells her, my father specifically never has, but in the past, yes. The Darkbringer Legion has refused twice. Thankfully, it was not in wars where it would have made a difference. They were in wars that they still won. It was a hard win, and a lot of people were hurt or died because of it, but they did still win. Moore also does kind of let us know a little bit about the Legion of Darkbringers, that they are almost as bad as their enemy when it comes to on the battlefield. And Rhys says, well, we're just going to have to make sure that we plan for that and we set new rules going into this. And Moore's response is, well, you're not going to have the ability to do that. You're not going to be in a position to make those demands, but we'll see because, of course, Rhysand is super crafty. Moore, of course, not thrilled about this option. Rhys tells her, well, you don't have to go. And she says, of course I have to go. It'll be worse if I don't go. And then she tells them, well, now I guess I have 2 days to find a dress that will suitably horrify my father, which cracks me up because that is why she wears her outrageous, very revealing dresses, partially to outrage her parents. And then after the debate, Feyre and Cassian are talking about when they're going to start training again, discussing, is it going to be 7:38, going back and forth. And Feyre actually says, I want to learn to fly. And I love the response that she points out from people at the table because Moore is so surprised that she spews her wine across the table onto Azriel. Azriel was too busy gawking at Feyre to even notice that there's now wine all over his chest and neck. And Cassian is looking at Azriel and is torn between laughing at him or just gaping because of what Feyre said. And so they decide it's Azriel who's going to teach her. They do talk about how it is that she has wings, and it is because of the shape-shifting gift that she has from Tamlin, which is why she hasn't used it a whole lot in the past, but she did use it when they were in the woods when Lucian tried to take her in the second book, and she shape-shifted to have wings. And now she wants to learn to fly because she thinks it'll be useful and because she plans to fight in the war. Cassian is very upfront with her and it tells her, well, that's great that you want to do that, but time-wise, I don't know if we're going to have that amount of time to actually be able to teach you all of it and get you to a point where you'll be able to fight with a Illyrian unit, because it takes years for them to do it, and they have months at best, weeks at worst. And Rhys, at the very least, says, well, at least we're going to teach her. We're going to teach her as much as we can, because his thought process is, I'm going to give her as much of a chance to live through this war as possible. And if teaching her how to fly, even remotely, even stumbling through the air, that is better than nothing. And again, it's Azriel, like I said, who is going to train her. Cassian and Rhysand offer, but Feyre decides she wants to try with Azriel because she knows that because he didn't start training until he was a certain age, that there were different things that had set in, fears, mental blocks. And these are all things that Azriel tells them, that he would feel more comfortable being the one to do it because she is older and she's going to have those fears and mental blocks like he had when he started training, because it is different. So at that point, Feyre switches gears and turns to Nesda and asks Nesda if she is willing to learn how to patch up the holes in the wall. She says, I might be able to do it, but because you are actually from the cauldron, because your power is from the cauldron, you might be able to do it better. Would you consider doing it? Nesda agrees to it, but Nesda will not go any further. She'll learn how to train her power enough to fix the holes in the walls, but she doesn't want to train to be a warrior or to fight. She doesn't want to train for any reason other than just to patch those holes. And she also doesn't want to tell her story to anyone because that is her story. Nesda does ask what happened to the human queens. Did they actually go into the cauldron? Were they turned immortal or not? And this is the first time that we get somebody asking this question, because Feyre hasn't really paid much attention, and Rhys has only said that they're really quiet on their side. And the response is, we don't know, because reports have been really murky and inconsistent. Some say yes, others say no. We're going to find out in a little bit whether they actually turned or not. And Nesda says she will agree to help them patch up the holes in the wall if by the end of this war, the king and those human queens are dead. Someone needs to promise her that they will be killed, and then she will agree. And we see now that Feyre is back in the Night Court, and she is High Lady for the first time is through this book. We do see her trying to figure out which part she wants to play, because Rhys has had a chance to be High Lord for 500 years now, and she's had like all of 5 days, if even that at this point, that she's announced she's a High Lady and is actually acting like High Lady back in the Night Court. So she flip-flops back and forth when talking to Nessa. Should I be the High Lady or Nessa's sister? Which one is going to be better, one, for this situation, but also two, which one is Nessa going to actually listen to or talk to? And I'm not going to say she makes a mistake in how she brings it up with Nesda, but essentially she does. She asks Nesda if Nesda would talk about what happened in the cauldron, talk about her turn, how she was forced to do it by Hybern, and if she will do it in front of the other High Lords in an effort to bring the other High Lords to their side. And Feyre is going to realize later on that asking her in front of a bunch of people wasn't a good idea. She should have asked one-on-one, but she makes a mistake. Nesda is not interested in telling anybody about what she went through when she went into the cauldron. At this point, no one knows what happens because she hasn't told anybody. Feyre does try to kind of coax her into agreeing, says, I understand that what happened to you is horrible. Nesda's immediate response is, you have no idea what it was or was not like when she went into the cauldron, and I'm not going to grovel like those children of the blessed, begging the High Fae who would have gladly killed me as a human to help us. I'm not going to tell them that story, my story. So Nesta puts her foot down and says, it's not my problem. If you're unreliable, I'll help you with the wall, but I'm not going to whore my story around to everyone on your behalf. And she does threaten everyone at the table and says, if you even dare to suggest Elaine do such a thing, I'll rip out your throat. And then she leaves the room in a glorious huff of anger. And Moore just hands the bottle of wine to Feyre and says, it's easier if you just drink straight from the bottle. Because this is what life is like now as High Lady.
I will say, on my read through, now that I've read Nesda's book, and I found her so much less annoying once I read her book. This scene kind of spoke to me differently than it did initially. Because initially I'm
Right?
like, well, can't she try and see where Feyre's coming from? But then now I'm like, well, reading from her perspective, maybe Feyre should have
Right?
backed off a little and
Yeah.
played the sister side a little more in that instance.
Yes. And I mean, even if she had played the sister side a little bit more, I don't think Nesda would have agreed to it then either. But I also think, yeah, like you said, not just that we've read Nesda's book at this point, so we get to see a little bit inside of her head. But if you think about it, Feyre took how many months after Under the Mountain before she was actually good or at a good point? And I want to say like 6 months. Yeah, it probably could have been faster if she didn't have to deal with Tamlin and the Spring Court and all of that nonsense. But it still took her a good 6+ months before she was back to a good point. And it's been a month, maybe a month and a half since everything that happened. So yeah, it's understandable that Nesta isn't good right now. She doesn't want to deal with any of that. It makes perfect sense to me. We finally have Rhys and Feyre getting a chance to talk about everything that happened when they snapped at when Feyre snapped at him in Amren's apartment a couple of chapters ago. They haven't had a chance to talk because they haven't been in private, just the two of them since. But they do finally get a chance to talk about it to kind of understand what was going through Feyre's head. His response is, I didn't mean to insult Nesda. Feyre's response is, I'm sorry I snapped at you. Rhys says, well, why are you apologizing? I insulted your sister. You defended her. You had every right to do that. And Feyre says, well, I didn't mean to undermine you because she's been brainwashed from the Spring Court. And that's when it kind of clicks for Rhys and he, okay, now I understand why things were so awkward or so strange between us this afternoon. And Feyre immediately starts apologizing again because she thinks Rhysand is upset or frustrated that she undermined him in front of their friends, and that's not the case. He wants them to challenge each other, even amongst their family. Maybe not amongst anyone outside of their family, but at least when they're just with their inner circle, he doesn't mind if she is challenging, if she challenges him or not. And he says, we can make whatever rules we want to. You have every right to question me, push me, both in private and in public. If you decide to truly kick my butt, then I'd ask that you do it in private because otherwise I won't hear the end of it if you do it in public or you do it around Cassian and Azriel. Feyre decides that she does not want either of them to undermine the other in public. She makes that rule, sets that up for them. But they can question each other through the bond if they're around other people. But for now, for these initial years, I'd like to show a unified front to the world, and that's Feyre's decision. And Rhys has been quiet through this whole thing, letting her think, letting her decide how she wants to do this, because she is the first High Lady that we've seen in Prythian, the first High Lady that's ever mentioned in the book. So this is what Feyre decides, that she wants them to be a unified front to the world because of everything that's going on. Rhys says that's fine. We'll make it work however we need to make it work, but I want you to feel comfortable pushing me, calling me out. And Feyre's immediate response is, well, when have I not done that? Because that's true. She has. From day one, she has pushed and questioned and called him out on everything. So they do agree that amongst family, they'll call each other out on their bullcrap, but outside of that, they need to question each other. It'll be mentally through their bond, or they'll wait and it'll be done in private. Feyre asks why Rhys likes that she calls him on his bullcrap. And he says, well, one, because it's fun, and two, because you are my equal. As much as that means that we're having each other's backs in public, it also means that we grant each other the gift of honesty, of truth, which is definitely something she did not have with Tamlin. And Feyre takes this moment in private to say, hey, I just want you to be super cautious when we go to the Hewn City and you deal with Kerr, Mora's dad, because I think if we don't play this right, then we could really hurt Mor because she has not healed from all of her trauma. And they do discuss that Mor and the Court of Dreams has been working with Kerr for 500 years, for a century. And Rhys says she should be used to it by now. But yes, I will make sure that I'm careful in how we handle it. And I agree, because I feel like it's been 500 years, or at least it's been a couple of centuries since all of this happened. How is she not, maybe not over it, that's not the right words, but how is she not able to kind of put up a wall and move past it with how much she already deals with them? I don't know. Feyre does ask which mask she's going to wear when they go to the Hewn City, and Rhys tells her you can choose. You get to choose which mask you want to wear. He says, you've seen how I am there, how the others are. It is up for you to decide how to play into that. And her response is, well, I'd like to be the one to make Kerr beg this time, which I love. They do talk a little bit about the meeting with the High Lord, that there is going to be a binding spell set wherever they end up going, so that anyone who is there isn't able to attack or hurt the others who are there as well. So it is going to force a ceasefire amongst all. And if someone breaks it during the meeting, the magic will demand a steep cost, probably their own life. So he's saying this because they're assuming at this point that Tamlin is Hybern's ally. And if Tamlin does show up, because he has been invited, if he does show up, will he cause bloodshed? So Rhys is explaining that that's not an option. And if Tamlin tries, then it could potentially take his life. And I think it's interesting because Rhys actually said Tamlin isn't at the top of his kill list, that it would actually be Baron, the High Lord of the Autumn Court. And Feyre's response is, well, Tarkin will be there, so we're at the top of his kill list. And then I do mention Helion, who is the High Lord of the Day Court, and Callias, because they are talking about who Rhys thinks they may have allies, or which ones are probably going to be easier to sway to their side. And Rhys says Helion and Callias. Maybe Callias, things have been a little strained because of everything that happened under the mountain, but they are usually the first two to side with the Night Court in instances like this. They also have a little discussion on Lucien and whether or not they trust Lucien. And they get him to a point where they say they trust him to an extent, but not completely. So they'll be slightly careful in what information they give him, but not overly careful. Like they're still going to give him most of the information. There's only little bits that they'll leave out. And they're also going to see kind of what he does, how he handles the next couple of days. Because at this point, he and Feyre have only been there for what, like a day, 2 days max, and that's it. So Feyre wants to see what he does. Where does he go? Who does he see? That kind of thing. How much they're going to give him a chance to go out and do things on his own and see what ends up happening, if they can trust him further or not. They do agree one thing they don't trust him with is Elaine. They don't trust that he won't try and take her back to the Spring Court. And Feyre does mention she doesn't like that. She doesn't like not knowing if she can trust him exclusively or if she needs to guard herself with him. And Rhys's response is, unfortunately, this is all part of the game. Who to trust, when to trust them, and what information to barter. Feyre asks if Rhys enjoys it. And he says sometime, but right now, no, because all of the risks are so high. And there's so much to lose. And I love the next morning. Rhys and Feyre wake up, enjoy themselves leisurely. And then Feyre goes to train with Cassian. And her initial comment when she gets to Cassian is, oh wow, 2 Illyrian males making me sweat in one morning. What's a female to do? It just cracks me up because Cassian he loves the snark. I mean, they all love the snark from Feyre. So, of course, he laughs immediately. At least you showed up with some spirit, because he's going to run her hard. They're going to go back to the basic because it's been multiple weeks since she trained with him. And I like that we get to see a little bit of Cassian and his frustration with Feyre because of everything that happened in Hybern when her sisters returned, and she ends up going back to the spring court with Tamlin. Because what happened was very similar to how things happened when Rhys ended up going under the mountain, at least in Cassian's eyes. So Cassian is frustrated not just with Rhysand, but with Feyre because she didn't tell them what she was going to do, just like Rhys didn't tell them what he was going to do when he went under the mountain, that they both hid the truth of her being High Lady from them, and they all went into Hybern blind. And Feyre says, well, what difference does it make that you didn't know I was a High Lady then? And he says, well, it makes all of the difference in the world. Everything would have been different. None of it would have gone down like that. I mean, there's no way to say whether it would have gone down differently or not, but Cassian does say, because you were his mate initially, you were ours to protect, but you were still his. You were his to protect primarily, and we were just like that second. We were the second shield if something happened to him when you were just his mate. But now that you're our High Lady, you are also ours. You're not just his. You're ours as well. You belong to all of us, and we belong to you. And we would have not put you in so much danger. And she says, well, that's why. That's why, Rhys and I didn't tell you, because you would have done things differently. And he says, this isn't between Rhys and I, this is between you and I. And this is when Cassian says, you didn't think you were essential. You saved our butts, yes, but you didn't think you were essential here. And her response is, I'm not. You all have a duty. You all are vital. Yes, I have my own ability, but with you and Azriel hurt, with my sister being thrown in the cauldron, I did what I could to get us out. I'd rather it was me than any of you. I couldn't have lived with the alternative. And Feyre kind of throws it in his face that Rhysand isn't this upset, so why is he upset? And Cassian's response is, do not think that Rhysand wasn't beside himself with worry and concern while you were gone. Don't think that he wasn't panicked the entire time, because he was. He didn't show it. He hid it very well. Yes, we all knew that you could handle yourself, but it doesn't stop us from worrying, because we were all terrified for you. We knew you would be fine, but Rhys pulled the same crap 50 years ago when he went to the party with Amaranth. And he says, I'll never forget the moment when he spoke to us all mind to mind, when I realized what was happening and that he'd saved us, trapped us here and tied our hands, but it went quiet in my head in a way it hadn't been before. Even with everything unleashing here across our territory, it just went quiet. And he says, after Hybern, the healer kept me asleep while she worked on my wing. So I woke up 2 weeks later. 2 full weeks had gone by between Hybern and when he actually woke up and was told what happened. And he says, that's when I heard. And when Moore told me what had happened to you, it went quiet again. So I love that we get this comparison between Feyre and Rhys in Cassian's eyes, that they are now the same. They are both his High Lord and his High Lady. When she pulled something similar to what Rhysand pulled, Cassian had the same response because of how much he cares and values both of them. And this is when he says, you can rely on us. Both of you can rely on us. I know Rhys is inclined to do everything himself, to give everything of himself. He can't stand to let anyone else offer anything, and neither can you. And Feyre says, well, and you can? And Cassian says, yes. It's not easy, but yes, I can. And he goes into discussing, he's been the general of the armies. Part of that includes knowing how to delegate to different soldiers or different captains in his command. And even after 500 years, Rhys still tries to do everything himself, still thinks it's not enough. And then Nesta walks up onto the training ring. Cassia's attention is immediately focused on her over Feyre's shoulder. Like, he knows the second Nesta walks. And Cassian asks if she wants to join them. And she says, well, it doesn't look like you're doing anything other than exercising your mouths. Because at this point, they've been talking for a while. And then we get a little payback because in the second book, Reese was stuck having to listen to Cassian and Nesda bicker while Feyre was off in the woods training her magic. Now it is reversed. Now Feyre is having to listen to Cassian and Nesda bicker while Reese is off having a meeting with the different peeps of the palace. And Farah is begging him to come save her so that she doesn't have to listen to them. And Reese sends Azriel instead and says, I sent you another pretty face for you to admire. Not as beautiful as mine, of course, but a close second. And then Azriel gets there, tells Cassian that they have to start their training early, and so he's taking Farah. Cassian, of course, knows that it's total bullcrap. He knows the exact reason why it's being done and glowers at Feyre because he knows. But Azriel picks her up and takes her off. They do end up going into a forest near a lake, and Azriel says that is because water is better to fall into than hard rock, which I completely agree for flying lessons. And what I love in these flying lessons, because we talked about it in the second book, is how she has a connection to each person in the Court of Dreams. Now she's getting more in-depth connection with Azure. Well, because he learned to fly later in life, she is now learning to fly later in life. They're getting this connection together. And we also get to see a little bit of Azriel's humor come out throughout their training sessions. And it makes me laugh so much because we're finally getting to know him a little bit more. So they end up just standing in a clearing staring at each other because Farah's not sure like how they're going to move forward in training how to fly. And Azriel's response is, well, in order to fly, you need wings. Because she's still just standing there in her Fae form without wings. And it cracks me up because he is just a little sarcastic in his humor. She makes an excuse. It's been a while since I've summoned them, and she's like trying to think through it, and it's taking a little bit of time. And he says, do you need me to turn around so that I'm not watching when you chase? And she's like, no, but it'll take me a few minutes. Give me a sec. Eventually, she does manage to summon her wing. And Azriel asks, of course, before he touches them, he asks if it's okay because, again, we get the reiteration that with Illyrian amongst their kind, you don't touch. It's inappropriate to touch someone else's wing, especially for female. And again, we have the specific wording that we've talked about multiple times for the second book. Azriel said to the Illyrians, their kind, not my kind, because he does not think of himself as an Illyrian. So she does say, yes, you can touch them. He just wants to ascertain that they feel right. So he kind of touches different parts, kind of flicks them a little bit, pokes them in different spots just to gauge, are they strong enough here? That kind of thing. He gives her some pointers, strengthen this part here, add a little bit here, take away from this to build them, make them a little bit stronger. And he tells, these, it's amazing. They're the same as mine. And she says, well, the magic did most of the work. And he says, no, you're an artist. It is your attention to detail. And then Farah says, okay, great. So what do we get to do first? Jump into a sky and fly away? And Azriel says, first lesson, don't let them touch the ground. And she's like, well, why? I didn't realize, obviously, I would love to fly, but having wings, this is the first book that makes it sound like horrendous to actually have wings unless you have enough muscle to be able to hold them up. Because Azriel tells her first lesson is to not let them drag. If they drag, there are things on the ground that can snag them or scratch them or nick them. You don't want splinters or shards of rock, stuck in your wings. It'll lead to infection. And so she talks so much throughout these couple of chapters where she's learning to fly and she's giving herself the wing that it's so painful that it's taking different muscles that she didn't realize that she needed to work on. A knife sharp pain rippled down my back as I tried to lift that. And it comes to a point where she can lift one, but she can't lift the other. So Azriel has her kind of open and then close the wings, open and close. And that is all she gets to on the first day is just opening and closing those wings because of the amount of muscle that she needs to build to be able to actually keep them up, let alone fly. I'm going to call that out. That's all they've done on this first lesson for flying. And yet, in a couple of pages, she's going to try flying herself. And it's pretty fun. Like I said, he does tell her you're going to need to strengthen your back muscles, your thighs, your arms, your core. And she's like, okay, so pretty much everything. I need to strengthen everything. And Azrael says, well, why do you think Illyrians are so fit? And Feyre says, well, why did no one warn me about this cocky side to you? And I love it because he has that personality. We just don't get to see it because everybody around him has such loud, vibrant personalities that he ends up fading into the shadow, literally, because Moore and Cassian are vibrant and loud. And he is her when she's done with Azrael after she opens and closes her wings multiple times. She comes back to Reese for that afternoon. She's going to spend in the library under the House of Wind looking and researching for information on the holes in the walls in general, trying to get information for Am. We find out that the library is built into part of the mountain and it actually tunnels down into the mountain. And so it is a very large round space. And so the shell and all of the walkway winds down. So you can look down the center of it to a great large pit at the bottom that you can't see because it's so dark and so far down. Feyre does ask what is at the bottom. Reese says, I don't know. I dared Cassian to go down and check once. And when he came back flying faster than I've ever seen him fly. And what is it? Like he didn't talk for 2 days afterward. And I threatened to go down and look myself. And he told me no, that he would tie me up before letting me go down to see it. So we don't know officially what it is. We're going to learn later in the book what creature is at the bottom. But at this point, Cassian is the only one. And if you bring it up, Cassian's face will go white and he won't talk for a couple of hours. Like he'll just go off because whatever it is so scary. We are introduced, well, to one priestess this visit to the library. Reese tells Feyre that he has made the library into sanctuary for priestesses who have dealt with trauma in their past. So they initially come in, and Clotho is the priestess who is there. He does give us a little bit of information after Clotho takes them to a little sitting area and has multiple books laid out for them. She was brutalized by a couple of males who actually broke her hands and her finger and started healing them as they broke so that they healed incorrectly. So Farah notices that her fingers are still twisted, they're still gnarled because they were healed that way, and that the males cut out her tongue so she couldn't speak or tell anyone what had happened to her. Of course, Moore finds her, brings her to Rhysand, and Rhysand is then able to look into her mind and find who it was that hurt her. And Moore is the one who hunts them down. And then Moore spends a good month or so in the library with Clotho, helping her overcome that trauma and getting used to being in the library. Thankfully, Clotho does have some magic, and that's how she's able to hold the books, move the books, that kind of thing, because her hands are so bad. And Feyre asks why no one actually healed them properly. And Reese says to heal them, they would have to re-break them. And Clotho is not mentally able to handle the trauma that would occur if she had to go through that again. There is a part where Rhysand is talking about what happened to the libraries and how the world kind of shifted after the war. When the wall went up, all the humans had to go below it, all the Fae had to go above it. Feyre asks what happened with the half Fae, half human, or those who were a hybrid. Rhys says, they were pretty much thrown out to me in both areas. The Fae didn't want them, the humans didn't want them. So they kind of died out because there was no place for them to go. And Feyre asks, if the wall comes down, would you be willing to open up Valaris and the Night Court to anyone who could get here? And he says, yes, most definitely. I would love to add new people from different places, different histories and culture. He says, I don't see how it could be a bad thing. The transition is probably more complex than we anticipate, but yes, the gates to the city would be open and those who need its protection can come here. So complete opposite from how it was prior to people knowing about Valaris, because no one could come to a city that they didn't know existed. And that's why they weren't able to help with the half Fae, half humans after the war. but he is willing to keep the gates opened. And something like that happens for this Reese, as he's talking to Farah about making the library a refuge for priestesses, he does mention that he spent a great deal of time in the library himself after Under the Mountain because he needed a chance to heal as well. And then we have an interaction where they are finally reading the books, and Farah says, "It's a miracle that I can actually read at all." And Reese says, "I believe my little reading lessons helped. I am the one who assisted you in learning to read." And Farrah says, "Yes, because Reese is the greatest lover a female can hope for is undoubtedly how I learned to read." And Reese's response is, "I was only telling you what you now know." And they flirt a little bit, tease each other, and then Reese winnows away because they're in a library and they can't just enjoy themselves in a library. I know people do in libraries, but we are not doing this in their library. So he winnows away and says, 2 hours, you focus on your books, I'll focus on my books, and then we'll go home and we can hang out together. Because they're distracting each other. He says, "You are distracting me. Just being around you is distracting." Because she says, "How am I distracting you? You're the one who's teasing me." And he says, "Just sitting next to you, you're distracted." We also find out as Farah is looking through the books that the wall was not supposed to be a permanent fixture, that it was supposed to go up and give the Fae and the humans a chance to heal after the war, and then it was supposed to come down, and they were supposed to figure out how to live together, both human and Fae, which I think is really interesting and a little bit of foreshadowing for what we're going to see at the end of book 3 and then into the next couple of books. Feyre does start to get the sense that not that Reese is hiding something, but that it's going to come, if it comes down to him and whether or not they're going to lose or win the war, that he is going to do everything that in his power, including giving up himself and using all of his power, whatever he needs to do to make sure they win, even if it means that he does not make it. So she's starting to see a little bit of foreshadowing into the rest of the book. She kind of starts to feel cold spread through her as they're talking through some of it on occasion when he talks about needing to do everything that he can and everything he has to make sure Prithian and she specifically live. But it is something that she's starting to kind of feel that something bad could happen in the future. And this is when they're talking about the war. Hybern is going to assume that they're going to try and bring all the High Lords together and fight together. So they're trying to come up with things that Hybern may not see coming to give them an edge in this war. And that's when Feyre says, "What about the bone carver? What about making him into a high fae body like Amren did when she left the prison and having him fight?" The next chapter, we have Cassian taking Feyre to see the bone carver to ask some subtle questions and kind of feel him out to see if there's a possibility he would consider fighting for them in the war. And if he did, what his payment would be. And I think it's interesting, a little bit of foreshadowing, because at the very beginning of this chapter, Feyre is talking to Cassian and says it's unsurprising that Cassian knew more about the Carver than anyone, thanks to morbid fascination with the prison and its inmates. So I think that's a little foreshadowing into him and Nezda's. Before they get to the prison, Feyre does have a nightmare, and this is a nightmare that isn't like anything else. It kind of takes all of her nightmares and wraps them into one. The nightmare isn't just happening to her, it's happening to those she cares about the most. So Nezda is spiked to the wall like Claire's body had been. Elaine is tied to the spit, slowly burning alive. Mare Fair is kneeling on the ground. She's not able to move. All she's able to do is watch. And she does end up watching Sand being pulled behind Amarantha as she leads him away. All he can do is look over his shoulder back at. And that's when Feyre realizes that he has his wings out and Amarantha has seen his wings. And she assumes he's then going to be tortured by Amarantha. She is hauled out of her dream by Rhysand, like usual, telling her to breathe over and over and over again. And her response to all of this is that never again is any of this going to happen to the people that I love. And then the next morning, they're going to go to the prison. Reese and Feyre have come downstairs. They're ready to go, but they're having a little makeout session before Feyre goes to the prison. That's exactly when Cassian walks in and just groans because they're kissing in the middle of the foyer. But they do end up going to the prison. Reese tells Feyre that while in there, she won't be able to use their bond because of the wards and the spells around the prison are far older than Prythian. Go in, get what you need, and come back out. Let me know when you're done. And then he winnows. Cassian does warn Feyre as they're going in that if she is able to get the bone carver to agree, if whatever his asking price is something that they're able to actually give him, that Feyre is going to need to find a way to control him while he's still in this world, or else will be enemies on all fronts. And Feyre said, the carver's that bad, really. And Cassian's response is, you're just asking me this now. And Feyre says, well, I figured if he was bad enough, then Rhys would have put his foot down if it was too risky. And Cassian's like, really? Rhysand, who does everything under the sun that makes my heart stop. He's the one that you think is going to say no? You're going to count on him to be the voice of Rhys, which I just love. Because, of course, Rhysand's going to do everything. We will find out at the end of this book, he's going to find extra people to join us in this war and not tell anybody about it until the second it happens. Because it's Rhysand, and we love him for it. Cassian gives us more information on the island that the prison is on. He says there was life here once before the High Lords took Prythian. Old gods, we call them. So he is also explaining who the Bone Carver is. The Bone Carver is an old god. They ruled the forests and the rivers and the mountains. Some were those things. Then the magic shifted to the High Fae, who brought the cauldron and the mother along with them. And though the old gods were still worshipped by a select few, most forgot. And legend says that is what the Bone Carver is, along with the whispers of being able to fell hundreds of soldiers in one breath. So we get a little bit of foreshadowing as far as what the Bone Carver could do on a battlefield. Feyre asks how he ended up in the prison. Cassian says, I don't know. No one does. And he wants to know how Feyre's going to get the Bone Carver out if he agrees to help, and she's going to use Amren. Cassian says, well, you better be careful how far you push her because she doesn't talk about that. She doesn't talk about the time before she came out. She doesn't talk about what happened for her to come out of the prison. And I love the way Feyre describes entering the prison the second time. She says the weight of the air inside the prison was heavy, like wading through unstirred air of a tomb, like stealing a breath from the open mouth of a skull. Like, what kind of crazy description is that? The open mouth of a skull. Creeps me out. And as they're going down, she says, this could be a very bad idea. And Cassian says, oh, it most definitely is, but this is war, and we don't have the luxury of good ideas. She's only picking between the bad ones. So they step into the Bone Carver's cell. And again, Feyre sees the little boy that she saw when she and Rhys came a couple of months ago. All the pieces click together, and Feyre realizes that this is the son that she and Rhys will have if they survive the war. Because he has Rhys's face, the coloring, and the eyes, but the boy has her mouth, her father's mouth. And she says, the hair on my arms rose, and the carver inclined his head in greeting and in confirmation, as if he knew precisely what I realized. Which, when we talked about it the first time they came, he asked Rhys if he could have Feyre's bones so that he could carve her death in it. And we know when Feyre gives birth in Nesda's book that it almost kills her. And I feel like such foreshadowing for him to be doing that in her son, in his body or in his image, because that's who almost kills her in Nesda's. Crazy amount of foreshadowing. And the carver does say, I was wondering when you would return. So he knew at some point she was going to come back for one reason or another. He does know that she is High Lady. He addresses her as such and asks her to accept his congratulations on their union. Then he turns to Cassie and says, I can smell the wind on you. And Cassian gives him a bone. It is the bone of the adder after Feyre splattered him on the streets of Valaris. Again, she had no idea that they kept this bone, but Rhys, being crafty as he is, kept it because they would probably need. And the Carver's response is so bloodthirsty, my new High Lady. And then he mentions his own sister, saying, I smell my sister on you, Cursebreaker. And we find out the Weaver in the Wood, where Feyre went to get the ring in book 2, is the Bone Carver's sister. Then the Bone Carver brings up Nesta, and he says, what if I tell you what the rock and darkness and sea beyond whispered to me, Lord of Bloodshed? And he's talking to Cassian when he says that. How they shuddered in fear on that island across the sea, how they trembled when she emerged. She took something precious, she ripped it out with her teeth. What did you wake that day in Highburn, Prince of Bastards? What came out was not what went in. How lovely she is, new as a fawn and yet ancient as the sea. How she calls to you, a queen, as my sister once was, terrible and proud, beautiful as a winter sunrise. And then he just kind of like purrs Nesda's name, saying how the wind moans her name. And Feyre at this point is pretty sure Cassian isn't even breathing. And the Bone Carver says, what did she do drowning in the ageless dark? What did she take? So again, we talked about it earlier in this episode. We don't actually know what happened when Nesda and Elaine were in the cauldron, because for Feyre and everybody outside of it, it was just a couple of seconds that they were in there. But we have no idea what the length of time was for Nesda while she was in there, or for Elaine while she was in. Eventually, the Carver does ask, why have you sought my services? And Feyre tells him, gosh, we attained the Book of Breathings, and there were interesting spells inside. So this is where she hints at what they need, but doesn't outright say. She says, codes within codes within codes. Someone we know as an Amryn cracked most of them. She's still looking for others. Spells that could send someone like her or others like her.
Do we know who Cassian sees in the Bone Carver in these? I don't think that was mentioned. I don't remember.
Don't think it describes,
No.
and I don't think we get it in the later book.
Yeah, reading back through that, I really wanted to know. Because I was
No.
trying to read between the lines to see, because he was kind of paling, and I was wondering, I can't remember the name of the thing in the bottom of the pit, but I was wondering if maybe it might have been, yeah.
Bryaxis is the fear at the bottom of the pit.
Yeah, and I was wondering if it might have been that because of the way it talked about impaling and things like that, but I was really hoping that we'd get that.
When they first walk into the Bone Carver's cell, Cassian growls at what it reveals.
And then I wondered if it might have been something to do with Nesta.
I kind of feel like Nesda. I think Nesda is more likely than anything else because, in all honesty, I just kind of assumed it was Jurian, just like it was for Rhys. But now that you mention it, it would make sense for it to be Jurian. It did when Rhys came because they were asking about Jurian. So I think you're right. Maybe he looks like Ness.
Yeah, I didn't think it was Jurian at all. I didn't get that reading through this. I think it probably is Nesta, the way that he's, especially as much as he's talking about her, too, trying to, like, egg him on a little bit.
Right, because then, paragraphs later, Cassian's face was pale enough that I knew whatever he was seeing, it wasn't a beautiful young boy.
So it makes you wonder if maybe he's seeing Nesda, but maybe if it warped to like whatever is inside that she took from the call, maybe he got to see.
Maybe he glimpses, or maybe like what she becomes later on.
So like her now, but what if he sees her with the trope?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I don't remember the exact description of her in that book, but you know how she's kind of like otherworldly a little bit?
Yeah. So maybe it starts out with him showing up as Nesta and then slowly turns into either her power or her using the Dread Trove, something along those lines. Because I agree, it does not, in this set of chapters, and at least in the first half of the next set of chapters, I don't remember it mentioning it at all, what Cassian's. We're going to have to keep an eye out for that as we read through later to see if we end up getting an answer. So Feyre does talk about the war coming and rumors suggesting that the Carver has gifts that would be able to assist for a and they're assuming it's that the Carver wants to go back to whatever world he came. And he goes on to tell them that he doesn't believe that there is anything left of the world that he came from. That it's most likely just dust drifting across a plain. So there is no home to return to. He wants to stay in this world, but specifically he wants to stay in this cell. And we find out why he wants to stay in this cell. We essentially find out that he kind of let himself be trapped. You're giving me a face. So let me get through it, and then you can bring up whatever you want to talk about, because I can see it in your eyes. He brings up that he actually wanted to be trapped because he did not want to have to face his brother and sister, who are also in this world. His sister, we learned just a minute ago, is the Weaver in the Wood. Her actual name is Str. We also find out that he has an older brother whose name is Koschei. And Koschei lives on on the main continent. He does not live in Prythia. We have the Bone Carver, who is the youngest of three. He is in the prison in Prythian because he wanted protection from his brother and sister. His brother and sister have been essentially tricked into their own little areas and kept in their own little area. So he talks about them both delighting in the world as they fell through a hole into this world. So all three of them came through at the same time and fell into this world. That initially they were worshipped, that Striga, the was able to get her power from those who worshipped her and steal their beauty, steal their life. So that's how she weaves their life into all of the thread and then the tapestries that she weaves. And the Bone Carver says, had I not been braver and waited for the time when their power faded, and a long ago Fey warrior tricked Striga into diminishing her power and becoming confined to the middle. Koschei, too, confined and bound by his little lake on the continent, all before Prythian, before the land was carved up and any High Lord was crowned. So all of this happened before the High Lords and before the courts in Prythian. And then he continues to talk about the clever Fey warrior. Her bloodline is female, not male. Her bloodline is long gone now, though a small trace runs through some human line. No one remembers her name, but I do. He doesn't tell us, but he knows. She would have been my salvation had I not made my choice long before she walked this earth. She could not kill them in the end. They were too strong. They could only be contained. I knew that long before she ever trapped them, took it upon myself to find my way to hide from his siblings. And Feyre asks, why? What are his siblings? And he says, they are death gods. You are immortal or long-lived enough to seem that way, but my siblings and I, we are different. And the two of them stronger, so much stronger than I ever was. He says, my sister, she found a way to eat life itself to stay young and beautiful thanks to the lives she steals, as in the week. And the Carver doesn't actually tell us what he is. Feyre asks, and his response is, I am forgotten. That's what I am, and that's how I prefer to be. I have no desire to remind my sister and brother that I am alive and in the world, contained and diminished as they are. Their influence remains considerable. Cassian tries to kind of taunt him and say if Hybern wins this war, there's a good chance the king would set everybody free from the prison. You may end up fighting them again if you don't help us fight the war, kind of thing. And the Bone Carver says, well, I don't think even the king of Hybern is stupid enough to let the people out of the. And then they kind of come to an understanding that there isn't something that they can offer. And he's not going to help unless there is something that they can offer. So they start to walk away and are just kind of talking amongst themselves about going to the Hewn City later that night. And the Bone Carver has them pause, kind of assumes, I guess you're coming to rally the entirety of the Night Court. Feyre says, well, that's none of your concern, obviously, since you're not going to fight with them. And then he's just kind of thinking out loud and says, you will be bargaining with Kerr. I wonder what his asking price will be. Interesting. And so Cassian stops and tells him, out with it. Tell us what you mean. And the Bone Carver is silent for a little while and then says, the eddies of the cauldron swirl in strange ways. My sister had a collection of mirrors in her black castle. She admired herself day and night in those mirrors, gloating over her youth and beauty. There was one mirror, the Ouroboros, she called it. It was old even when we were young, a window to the world. All could be seen, all could be told through its dark surface. Kerr possesses an heirloom of his household. Bring it to me, that is my price. The Ouroboros here, yours to wield, if you can find a way to free me. So he has agreed he will fight in the war if they find a way to free him and if they bring him the Ouroboros, which is a mirror that apparently an heirloom of Kerr's family. So let's talk about mirrors.
Okay,
Where
well, the
else do we
mirrors and
see
all.
mirrors?
Well, yeah, it's sort of
And who has the mirror?
me and the witch.
The
Well,
witch.
the witch. Well, but then I'm also going into Crochet and Striga being because eating the world, going through the rips in the world, having to be contained, it's all there. The extra power.
Considering.
And I
Okay.
couldn't text either one of you last night when I'm reading, because of course I'm reading after 11 o'clock Eastern. So I'm over here freaking the heck out, and there's no one I can freak out.
Okay, so we got two different theories. So Striga and Koschei, the older two. That's interesting. I'm not going to say that I don't think they are Vogue, but if we're going based off of the lore in Throne of Glass, Erewhon is the youngest of three brothers. He has two older brothers.
That's right. Maeve is married into.
Maeve marries into the family. So it's not to say that there aren't additional Vogue kings or queens, because we don't, like, it kind of hints when Maeve is talking about it that she was a queen prior to marrying. So we don't know if there are other family lines, I guess you could, with the vault. So maybe.
Well, that's where both theories came out when I'm reading, because the first few pages, I'm focusing on that, and then we get to the mirrors, and I'm going, or the witch. We're talking about a family line not knowing more full familial history, and if it's an heirloom that goes to Kirk, where's the tie there? Because we had the mirror that Manon and
That they walk through. Okay, so we have Striga and Coast and the possible Vogue ties. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know, because multiple times throughout this series it talks about different beings that fell through the holes. Amren supposedly is one of those beings that fell through the hole. These three are another set of beings that have fallen through the holes. It's kind of hinted at that there are multiple creatures that have fallen through the holes. We're going to get a little more information on that kind of stuff in the next series. So I'm not going to say anything else on Volg may or may not be in the right direction. It's hard to say because we don't officially. And I actually really hope that we get more information on Koschei because he and the Firebird that we're going to learn about in the next episode are going to come into play a lot more at the end of this book. And I really want that to be a book. Like, that's one of the ones that I'm hoping we get to. Okay, and then our separate one is the mirrors. So we have these mirrors. The Ouroboros is a window to the world. All could be seen, all could be told through its dark surface. And in Throne of Glass, the mirrors were something that the witches had. Both the Iron Teeth and the Cretans, witches, have mirrors in some way. On top of that, Elena uses a mirror to hold a memory, which is what Manon and Aelin step into to be able to see the memories of how they actually have to put Erewhon into the law and send the gods back and have the gods take him with them, which all of that doesn't end up happening the right way. So now we have another mirror, and I think it's really interesting because we haven't mentioned that it is an heirloom of Kerr's household. And we have hinted a little bit, the possibility that Mor has witch blood, Mor and her family, which would kind of lead you to believe that even more if her family has a mirror that sounds a lot like a witch. If it's an heirloom of her household, there's a good chance she is also a witch or some version of a. But I think it's interesting too that he also mentions it is a window to the world. And the other creature, Kay, that you mentioned a little bit ago, Abraxas, when we meet him in a couple of chapters, what does he want? A window. So these crazy powerful creatures who have landed here eons ago, gotten kind of captured or restrained into an area, don't want to leave because they become comfortable in the spaces that they're in. But they want a window out. They want to be able to see more, which I think is really interesting. We end this set of chapters with Cassian and Farah saying, "You knew the carver was an old god. Did you know he was a death god?" And Cassian says, "I guessed he carves death into bones, sees them, enjoys them. It wasn't hard to figure out." So Cassian at this point is kind of telling us that the carver is a death god as well, not just his brother and sister. Whereas the carver didn't confirm that for us, but Cassian kind of has to ask, was it you or was it Reese who suggested you come with me? And he says, I wanted to come, but Reese guessed too. Because of what they'd seen in Nesda's eyes that day at the cauldron. And she says, like calls to like. And Cassian responds with, I don't think even the carver knows what Nesda is, but I wanted to see just in case. And then Feyre asks him, would you be frightened if Nesda was death, if her power came from it? And I love his response because he says, I'm a warrior. I've walked beside death my entire life. I would be more afraid for her to have that power, but not afraid of her. Nothing about Nesda could frighten. And that's all we get in this chapter. So some interesting thoughts and ideas. Lots of information that we get, but don't have all of the pieces. Like, I'd love to know who the female Fey warrior is who is able to confine Koschei to his lake and the Weaver, Striga, to the middle. The Weavers will. I'd love to know who that person is.
Because it makes you think of immediately.
Exactly. And talking about how it's in some human bloodline. just makes you wonder, like, we've seen so many humans that are either half human, half fae, or humans who have become fae, that it just makes you wonder, is it part of any of their bloodline? We don't, but I want to know. I just want to know. We still don't know who Cassian saw when he looked at the bone carving, which now I really want to.
Yeah, I was reading through this though. So when I don't remember exact verbiage, it said he went pale.
At the beginning, or no.
What did it say specifically he did?
So at first he growls. Cassian growled at what it revealed. This is page 235. And then Feyre describes what she sees and that she links it to her child. And then towards the bottom, she says it was an effort to keep my knees from buckling. Cassian's face was pale enough that I knew whatever he was seeing, it wasn't a beautiful young boy.
Then at the end of 23, though, and he's saying that nothing about Nesta could frighten me. So that makes me think maybe it's not, because if he's pale, I feel like he would be frightened unless he's seeing it and it's making him sick, kind of pale.
I would think it's more along those lines, that he is not afraid of what he's seeing.
But maybe afraid for her. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. The book explicitly reveals what the bone carver shows Cassian when they visit him in the. Do I just want to know.
All right. Well, there you have it. All we promised and even more angst than anticipated, all in one episode. So go ahead and keep on reading, laughing, gasping, squealing, and don't forget to continue theorizing. Let us know if there's anything you thought of that we forgot, and we'll see you next time.